Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every relationship where things fall apart. Maybe he walked away, maybe he lost interest, or maybe he simply stopped trying. And in that moment, you're tempted to beg, to reach out, to remind him of everything you shared. Silence is power. It's one of the most underrated yet impactful tools we have in relationships, especially when emotions run high and confusion takes over. In a society that values fast replies, constant validation, and being allowed to be heard, silence feels uncomfortable. But that discomfort is where its true power lies. When you choose silence, you take control of the emotional narrative without ever saying a word. It's not about ignoring someone to play games, it's about stepping back to protect your energy and allow space for clarity. In relationships, especially after a fallout or breakup, there's a natural urge to speak. Explain, defend, or even beg. That impulse is human. We want closure, understanding, and connection. But more often than not, that over-communication leads to desperation. It gives away all your power and shows the other person that you're still emotionally tied to them, even if they've already pulled away. Silence, on the other hand, does the opposite. It speaks volumes. It tells the other person that you are secure enough to let them go. It signals self-respect. When you stop reaching out, stop explaining yourself, and stop reacting, you create a powerful shift. You no longer operate from a place of need, you operate from a place of strength. When someone expects a response and gets none, they start to reflect. They wonder what changed. They begin to miss the attention they once took for granted. Your silence becomes the mirror they weren't ready to face. People notice absence more than presence, and the quiet space you leave behind becomes louder than any message you could have sent. It forces them to sit with the consequences of their actions and decisions. It shows them that you will not beg to be in someone's life, and that realization can be both humbling and attractive. Moreover, silence gives you time to regain emotional balance, see the situation for what it truly is, and reconnect with your own worth. Speaking too soon often leads to saying things out of hurt or fear. Silence, however, gives space for wisdom. You begin to realize that not everything deserves a response. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. You learn to pause, to assess whether reaching out would actually serve your well-being or just serve your ego's need for attention or closure. It also allows you to observe more clearly. When you're silent, you can watch what the other person chooses to do. Do they reach out? Do they respect your distance? Do they show effort without being prompted? Silence reveals truth. It separates genuine care from convenient comfort. It tests intentions in a way that words never can. When someone no longer has your attention, their actions become the clearest signal of how much you matter to them. In a deeper sense, silence is a form of emotional discipline. It's choosing peace over chaos, confidence over chaos, and wisdom over reaction. It's a reminder that you don't owe anyone immediate access to your thoughts or emotions. You have the right to retreat, regroup, and return stronger. And in that space, you often realize that your silence wasn't just a tool to get someone back, it was the key to finding yourself again. That's where the real power lies. Absence creates value in ways presence never can. When you step back from someone's life intentionally and without drama, you change the dynamic between you and that person in a fundamental way. The truth is, people tend to overlook what's always available. When you're constantly present, constantly reaching out, constantly showing you care, that effort becomes expected. It starts to lose its impact. What once felt meaningful begins to feel ordinary. But when you remove yourself from the picture, when you stop being the ever-present figure in someone's life, something shifts. The things they once dismissed start to echo louder in their absence. Absence introduces contrast. It brings perspective. It forces the other person to notice what life is like without your energy, your attention, your warmth. That silence, that space you leave behind, becomes its own kind of statement. It says you had something valuable and now it's missing. This absence allows them to reflect, to realize, and to reevaluate what they took for granted. And often it's only when something is no longer easily accessible that its true value becomes clear. This isn't about manipulation, it's about balance. Relationships, romantic or otherwise, thrive on mutual appreciation. When one person is always showing up while the other does the bare minimum, it creates an imbalance that breeds complacency. The more you give without pause, the more you're teaching the other person that they don't have to reciprocate to keep you around. Absence interrupts that cycle. It creates a moment of pause, of emptiness that can wake someone up to your worth in a way constant presence never could. There is a psychology behind this. Human beings are wired to value what they fear losing. Scarcity makes us pay attention. Think about luxury goods, rare experiences, or limited opportunities. The less available something is, the more desirable it becomes. This same principle applies to emotional presence. When your time, attention, and energy are no longer on tap, they become more precious. You are no longer a background presence. They start to feel your absence as a void. And while they feel that void, you begin to reclaim your energy. Absence doesn't just create value in their mind, it restores value in yours. You begin to remember that your worth isn't tied to someone else's attention. You stop overgiving and start observing. You realize that your presence is a gift, not a guarantee. When you pull back, it becomes clear who truly values you and who only valued your availability. There's a quiet strength in knowing when to walk away, even temporarily. It takes self-control to stop giving, especially when emotions are involved. But that decision to withdraw can be one of the most powerful moves you make. It disrupts patterns. It resets expectations, and it allows the other person to feel the contrast between life with you and life without you. Sometimes absence leads them back. Other times it leads forward. Either way, value is created whether it's in their realization or in your own growth. What matters is that you understand your worth doesn't diminish in distance. In fact, it often shines brighter in the space you leave behind. That's the paradox of absence. It has a way of amplifying what was once overlooked, revealing truth in the silence, and restoring power to the one who chooses to step away. Scarcity fuels desire because what is rare naturally becomes more attractive. This principle doesn't only apply to material things like luxury items or limited time offers, it applies just as powerfully to people, attention, and emotional availability. When something or someone is always within reach, always accessible, it's easy to stop appreciating it. It becomes familiar, and familiarity often breeds complacency. But when that same thing becomes scarce, even for a short while, it awakens a sense of urgency and emotional craving that wasn't there before. Scarcity has a way of turning something ordinary into something people suddenly want to chase. In relationships, this plays out constantly. When you're always available, constantly texting back quickly, always initiating plans, or never saying no, your presence becomes predictable. Predictability, while comfortable, can become boring. The very fact that someone knows exactly where to find you emotionally or physically can reduce the intensity of their desire. But the moment you become less available, the moment you stop showing up with the same eagerness, you introduce uncertainty. That uncertainty sparks curiosity and desire. People begin to wonder what changed, and they start to revalue what they once assumed would always be there. Scarcity activates a part of the human brain that fears loss. When people feel they are about to lose something valuable or that it is no longer as accessible, they are more likely to take action. This is why people often show more effort after you've pulled away, not while you're consistently giving. It's not because they didn't care before, but because they didn't have to. Your abundance removed the need for effort. Once that abundance disappears, effort suddenly becomes necessary, and that's when true desire is revealed. This isn't about manipulation, it's about understanding value. If you always give your time, love, and attention freely without boundaries, people begin to subconsciously devalue it. But when you place limits, when you say no, when you choose to focus on yourself, when you become selective with your energy, you send a signal that your presence is meaningful. You show that your love is not something to be assumed or exploited. Scarcity, in this sense, protects your worth and enhances your allure. This principle also works internally. When you see yourself as valuable, when you treat your time, energy, and affection as something special, you naturally become more selective. You stop giving yourself to people who don't show up for you. You stop chasing validation. You become more attractive because you exude self-respect, and that energy draws people in. When you embody the idea that you are not available to everyone, you attract those who are willing to rise to the occasion to meet you where you are. Scarcity also creates mystery, and mystery is compelling. When someone doesn't know everything about you, when they can't predict your every move, they start to pay closer attention. They start to wonder, to ask questions, to chase. Mystery is a magnet because it leaves space for the imagination. It invites curiosity, and curiosity leads to emotional investment. Desire thrives on uncertainty and challenge, not ease and abundance. That's why being too accessible too soon can kill attraction. But by preserving your mystery, by becoming slightly scarce, not cold, not distant, but just unavailable enough, you increase your value in someone else's eyes. You become something they want to earn, not something they assume they already own. That's how scarcity fuels desire. It turns attention into pursuit, availability into appreciation, and presence into privilege. Self-worth is non-negotiable because it defines the standard for how you allow yourself to be treated, not only by others, but by yourself. It is the internal foundation upon which all healthy relationships, boundaries, and decisions are built. Without a strong sense of self-worth, it becomes easy to settle for less love, less respect, less effort. You begin to accept behavior that chips away at your confidence, all in the name of keeping someone around, seeking validation, or avoiding loneliness. But when you know your worth truly and deeply, you stop negotiating with people who offer anything less than what you deserve. In moments of heartbreak, disappointment, or rejection, it's easy to question your value. You start wondering if you're enough, if you should have done more, or if something is wrong with you. This self-doubt can be overwhelming, especially when someone you cared about didn't see your value at century. But their failure to recognize your worth doesn't mean you don't have any. It means they weren't capable of appreciating what you bring to the table. And that realization must not shake your inner truth. You are worthy, always, regardless of how someone else chooses to see you. People will treat you the way you allow them to. When you continue to show up for someone who constantly disappoints you, you silently send the message that their behavior is acceptable. When you stay in situations where you are not valued, you compromise your own sense of worth. The hard truth is that love alone is not enough. You need respect, effort, honesty, and consistency. And if those things are missing, walking away isn't an act of bitterness, it's an act of self-respect. Self-worth doesn't mean you think you're better than anyone. It means you no longer tolerate being treated as if you're less than anyone. It's the quiet confidence that says, I don't need to beg for love. I don't have to prove myself. If you don't see my value, I won't force you to. This mindset doesn't make you cold, it makes you strong. It protects you from cycles of emotional dependence and teaches you to prioritize your peace over fleeting affection. The moment you make your self-worth negotiable, you open the door to all kinds of emotional compromises. You tolerate toxic behaviors, ignore red flags, and start to mold yourself into what you think others want just to feel accepted. But that acceptance is hollow because it's based on a version of you that's not real. Real fulfillment comes from being loved and respected as your authentic self, not a diluted version crafted to avoid rejection. Reclaiming your worth can be uncomfortable. It might mean walking away from people you love. It might mean being alone for a while. But that space you create by choosing yourself is where true healing happens. In that space, you rediscover your value not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who chooses themselves first. From that place of inner strength, the connections you attract are rooted in mutual respect and genuine appreciation. When you treat yourself with value, you teach others how to treat you. You stop over-explaining, over-compensating, and over-giving. You realize that love should never come at the cost of your dignity. And most of all, you remember that someone else's inability to see your worth does not diminish it. It only reveals their limitations, not yours. That's why self-worth is not up for debate, discussion, or compromise. It is the standard, the boundary, and the foundation for a life built on truth and self-respect. Detachment leads to healing because it creates the space necessary for clarity, peace, and emotional restoration. When you are deeply attached to someone or something that causes pain, confusion, or imbalance, your mind becomes clouded by expectations, disappointments, and repeated emotional cycles. You find yourself obsessing over what they're thinking, whether they'll come back, or what you could have done differently. This attachment becomes a source of suffering because it keeps you tied to an outcome you can't control and a version of reality that no longer serves you. Detachment is not about giving up on love or becoming cold. It's about reclaiming your sense of self outside of someone else's presence or approval. Letting go of emotional attachment doesn't happen overnight. It requires intention and often feels painful at first, but it is through that discomfort that real healing begins. Detachment allows you to pull your energy inward, to stop feeding a situation that no longer nourishes your growth. You stop pouring effort into trying to change someone or fix something broken, and you begin to focus on yourself, your thoughts, your needs, and your healing. It is the first step toward freedom from the patterns that have kept you stuck. When you're emotionally entangled, even small actions or silences from the other person can trigger waves of anxiety and self-doubt. Detachment reduces that emotional volatility. You begin to see things more objectively without your emotions blinding you to reality. You stop creating narratives or holding on to hope that doesn't align with the truth. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of clinging, you release. And in that release, you gain power. Detachment also creates boundaries, both emotional and energetic. It reminds you that your happiness should never be completely dependent on another person's actions. It teaches you that someone else's inability to love you properly does not mean you are unlovable. It reinforces the fact that your peace is too important to sacrifice for anyone who can't show up for you consistently and with care. You start to realize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away, even if your heart is still holding on. Healing happens in the stillness that detachment provides. It gives you the time and mental space to process what happened, to grieve without interference, and to reconnect with your own voice. It allows you to redefine what you truly want, not from a place of desperation, but from a place of self-respect. The more distance you create from what hurt you, the more you begin to see that you're capable of standing on your own. You recognize your strength, and that realization becomes the foundation for deeper, more lasting healing. There is a misconception that detachment means you no longer care, but in reality it means you care enough about yourself to stop allowing someone else to control your emotional state. It means you're choosing inner peace over chaos, reality over illusion, and self-respect over emotional dependency. It's an act of maturity, a decision to let life flow without forcing connections that aren't meant to last. In time, detachment leads to emotional balance. You no longer react to every text absence or mood shift. You no longer chase or beg, you simply allow, and in that allowing you find serenity. You may still care for someone, but you no longer sacrifice yourself to keep them close. That shift is where the healing begins, not in getting the closure or apology you once wanted, but in realizing you no longer need it. Reclaiming your energy changes everything, because it redirects your focus from what drains you to what empowers you. When you stop giving your energy to people, habits, and situations that no longer serve you, you begin to restore your sense of peace. And situations that no longer serve you, you begin to restore your sense of peace, purpose, and power. Energy is not limitless. Where you invest it determines the quality of your life. For too long, you may have poured it into relationships that were one-sided, arguments that went nowhere, and thoughts that left you feeling unworthy or stuck. But once you make the decision to pull that energy back to yourself, everything begins to shift. It starts with awareness. You begin to notice what feels heavy, who leaves you mentally exhausted, and what situations consistently disrupt your emotional balance. Reclaiming your energy doesn't always mean cutting people off, it means creating boundaries so your emotional resources aren't constantly being depleted. It means becoming intentional about where your attention goes. When you realize how much of your daily peace is consumed by overthinking, pleasing others, or chasing validation, you understand why you feel drained. Taking that energy back isn't selfish, it's necessary. You start to move differently. You're no longer available for drama, inconsistency, or emotional chaos. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop showing up for situations that leave you feeling small or invisible. You begin to prioritize your mental clarity and emotional stability over temporary comfort or approval. As your energy returns to you, so does your power. You start to operate from a place of inner alignment instead of desperation or fear. One of the biggest transformations that occurs is in your self-perception. When your energy is scattered, your self-worth often suffers. You question your value based on how others treat you or how much you're able to give. But when you bring that energy back, you begin to see yourself more clearly. You remember that you don't need to prove your worth by overextending yourself. You no longer feel guilty for choosing rest, solitude, or saying no. You realize that protecting your energy is an act of self-respect, not avoidance. The shift also affects your relationships. People notice when your energy changes. Some may pull away because they can no longer benefit from your lack of boundaries. Others may rise to meet you at your new level. But either way, the dynamic changes. You attract different experiences when you operate from a full cup. Your presence becomes more intentional and your standards become non-negotiable. You stop chasing connections and start cultivating ones that feel reciprocal and genuine. Reclaiming your energy also enhances your creativity, focus, and emotional resilience. When your energy isn't constantly leaking, you have more capacity to pour into your goals, your healing, and your growth. You stop reliving the past or fearing the future. You become more grounded in the present, more aware of your own needs, and more capable of meeting them. That sense of inner steadiness becomes your anchor in a world full of distractions and demands. Ultimately, this process changes your entire outlook. You no longer live life in survival mode. You begin to live intentionally, choosing what aligns with your values and what brings you peace. You become more selective with your time, more confident in your choices, and more in tune with your intuition. What once felt like chaos begins to feel like clarity. What once drained you now empowers you. And all of it begins with the simple, radical decision to reclaim the energy that was always yours.